When someone is, I guess when someone is connecting with another person, the first meeting, first date or first interaction, what is the biggest mistake they could make, you think, in pushing that person away from actually wanting to be curious about them and wanting to learn more about them? What is the biggest mistake that a guy could do and a woman can do in their first interaction of a date?
I mean, something that I think there's a real deficit of these days is actual vulnerability. Not like there's sort of fake there's a lot of fake vulnerability. There's a lot of people telling like their hero's journey. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
And we all have one of those stories, right? We all have the story of when we weren't doing so well and when our back was against the wall and the odds were against us and we were in a really bad spot in life and then we came through it. But those aren't necessarily vulnerable stories because you're the hero of that story. Right. It's like, look how hard it was and look how awesome I am that I was able to get out of that. There's no shame on doing that. It's just, I don't think that that's the same thing as connecting with who you really are and what you think about. And that's like a very, we have these very well scripted hero's journey stories of our life that make us sound really impressive. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's the same thing as really connecting. And being vulnerable. And so I think one of the mistakes, I suppose, that people make early on is never really being vulnerable. And vulnerability isn't. I always remember I did a TV show in Australia. And before anyone who doesn't know me watching this thinks that must mean I'm Australian. I am not. I'm English. I feel like everyone in America always still thinks I'm Australian. Really? But I was doing a TV show in Australia. And
did they know you were British in Australia?
Yeah, they know. They know. But I remember this woman that I was coaching on this show. She kept going on to every date. She went on this date and I was supposed to give feedback, watching them on the dates and seeing how they did and what they could do to kind of improve next time around. And one of the things I kept noticing was like throughout the date, she was just really laughing hard at everything this guy said. And at the end of the date, I said to her, he wasn't that funny. Right. Like, you were laughing like constantly, but he wasn't very funny. It doesn't mean you couldn't have politely laughed now and again at, his attempts to be funny, but the way that you were laughing all the way through the date was sort of inauthentic. That wasn't really you, because I know you didn't find all of those things funny. And by the way, you were laughing hysterically even when he wasn't trying to be funny.
Sure.
So I said that in itself was an absence of vulnerability, because instead of just connecting as you were and sitting into the date and maybe occasionally allowing there to be a breath without filling every silence, and that would have been a more authentic experience. So I said to her, the next date you go on with the guy, I want you to just share a little more, because you also asked him a lot of questions. That's another version of not being vulnerable, is when we just ask someone else lots and lots of questions and keep them talking.
Yes.
And we don't ever share anything. And I coach a lot of people who are like, especially a lot of women I work with are like, men don't ask questions. And I know that if you were to watch a lot of them, by the way, that's true. A lot of guys aren't asking questions. They're all too happy to just take the floor and talk about themselves. But if we're in a insecure place of not wanting to be vulnerable ourselves, we play into that dynamic because we keep setting them up. We ask another question, and when they've finished talking, instead of vulnerably allowing there to be a silence for that person to have to now come in and ask you a question, you fill it again. And you ask another question, and then that person says, okay, me again. And then they start talking and telling you another story. So we actually precipitate that dynamic by never taking the floor for ourselves and telling a story or sharing. So anyway, For me, her version of just asking questions and laughing was a form of lacking vulnerability, not really sharing.
Yeah.
So I said, the next date I want you to go on, I want you to be a more authentic version of yourself, and I want you to share. And this is darkly funny, but do you understand the context in which this was funny? She went on the date and she told a story of a horrible car accident her father had had.
Oh my gosh.
That changed his life forever. And, I just remember being tickled by it because it was obviously this was a big story in her life. This was like one of the most tragic moments in hers and her dad's life. This was not like a second date.
Right.
Like,
Conversation.
this is how to, when I said be vulnerable, I didn't mean go and tell the most tragic story of your life.
Yes.
There's other ways to be vulnerable because not everyone deserves to know at the beginning of our connection with them all of our flaws, everything we're insecure about, everything we worry about on our worst days, all of the things we're struggling with. Yeah, like you don't necessarily trust someone enough you don't feel safe with them enough to share all of those things. But there's other ways to be vulnerable. If you share with someone something that you're passionate about, that's vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because often what we're passionate about isn't popular or it's not cool.
It's weird. It's nerdy. It's some unique hobby.
It's weird. Yeah. It's like our thing.
Uh-huh.
And it's a little bit like, it's very us, whatever that thing is very often, or why we like it is very us. And so sharing something, whether it's a TV show or a song that you listen to a lot that you like, if it came on your like Spotify shuffle,
Uh-huh.
it would embarrass you that it came on in a room and that was on your, the shuffle
Right.
gods really screwed you by playing that while everyone else was around. That sharing those things and the things you're into, that itself is an act of vulnerability because you're sort of allowing yourself to be seen a little
Yeah.
bit. So, I think
interesting.
these are all ways that people can be on a date with us or be in a room with us and go, aha, a person. And it's worth asking ourselves, how did I create any of those moments on this date? Or was I constantly tight and tense and censoring myself and anything that was really me and asking them lots of questions, which is it feels like connecting when you're only ever asking someone else questions because you're like, I'm doing it all right. I'm told to be a great listener and I'm told to be curious. And I was doing that. I was being really, really curious. But there's a point where that goes past.
Too much. Yeah.
Yeah, because now there's not a connection here.
No one knows anything about you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think there's a very dark end of the spectrum with love bombing and there's a much more naive end of the spectrum with love bombing. The sort of dark end of the spectrum is someone who's really trying to get you to move faster than you would organically move so that they can extract a lot of attention and value and love from you very, very quickly.
Wow.